In the 1980s, the Satanic Panic took over society. A legion of people believed that children were being sexually assaulted and abused in satanic rituals. Any murder that looked even remotely satanic, whatever that meant to middle America, was used as a way to push this agenda. It became a morality panic, much like the Salem witch trials beforehand. Hashtag The Crucible. Also, good movie starring Winona Ryder. Check it out. It became a way for people to harass their neighbors and employ vendettas. This panic had major consequences for those pulled into its orbit. As a true crime nerd, whenever we examine this period, the question always comes up: how did anyone let it get this far? Fear, puritanical politics, morality, and a desire to find some sense of safety and order in the chaos, and of course people just being the worst versions of themselves and using the trauma around them as their mace in order to hammer their idea of justice were all at play. Morality culture never went away and has been absorbed and appropriated over the years as a way of promoting the agendas of whomever was carrying that banner of justice. I highly recommend the podcast You're Wrong About in their episode on PC culture, and by the time this video comes out, actually no, they're not doing an update during May, so listen to that episode about PC culture on their podcast. It's really good. What I want to talk about in this video is morality and purity culture in fandom, and having a culture that combines social justice issues with shipping, a topic I've talked about before, but I figured it was probably good to actually discuss this issue in a long form, broad way, and my god, is it long form. There are a lot of motivations for this, including my own stroll into the shipping drama, but at the core of this, my reason is very, I would say, naive. We need a better way of discussing these issues in fandom. Online culture is a place that gives you both an entry points into becoming a more inclusive thinker. That's how I became that way, and if you followed me on any format, whether it be Tumblr or live journal or anything, you can definitely see me growing as I am being exposed to more theory, growing up and changing, and it's a natural part of becoming an intellectual adult. I think critical thinking is super important regardless, and like, it just happens. It's also important to recognize how to have these conversations online. We're talking to fans, young people, adults, kids, who are all coming to these shows with different levels of education, personal trauma, and desire to be involved in the political miasma that is shipping and issues of shipping harassment. So in this video, I'm going to tackle the whole pro-anti-shipping situation, because that's a lot, the discussion of harassment, and then specifically address some of the larger social justice issues I see being brought up using ships I have some sort of personal relationship with. So there's gonna be a lot of time codes in this video, so my hope is that for those who are looking for a better way to communicate these topics, I can provide my own experience on how to navigate these things as someone who has been in fandom for a long time, has gotten called out in productive ways at times, and has both loved fandom and hated it in the same breath. I have a very big thing of gin to get me through this. All right, if you're still here, smash that like button. It's a button, right? Yeah, that subscribe button. Please leave me a comment if you enjoyed this video, because every little bit helps. And thank you so much for watching, especially those who watched my last video that exploded. Didn't expect that. And it's because of you that I have this really cool Audible spot, and I have a bunch of book suggestions in the Audible spot, so let's go to the ad. This video is sponsored by the lovely members of my Patreon and by Audible. Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment all in one place. At Audible, you can find the largest selection of audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers and new releases to the celebrity memoirs about people who want to tell you what self-help is, even though the truth is that they've just had money for a really long time. And not to mention thousands of popular and binge-worthy podcasts, and believe me, and if any of you are like me, this entire pandemic has made you binge listen to so many podcasts. As an Audible member, you get 1 credit every month, good for any title in the entire premium selection. And that means the latest big hit books, the hottest YA, catching up on them Shadow and Bone books, you know, really Six of Crows. But, you know, they're titles that you can keep forever in your Audible library and re-listen to them whenever you want, which is something that my mother loves because I got her Audible for the Malcolm X audiobook, which was recorded by Lawrence Fishburne, and she loved it. It came recommended by Ilyana Shabazz, and she hasn't turned back from Audible since. Every month she's asking me for a new recommendation. So it's got the Jamaican mom seal of approval. And new members can try Audible for 30 days. Some books that I would recommend that I have been enjoying are Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. If you're interested in fiction, I have been in like a women of Greek mythology mood, and there has been so much stuff coming out on that topic. And as you guys know, I have an Ariadne Medea tattoo, so I was looking forward to that book. In nonfiction, I would recommend Cicely Tyson's Just As I Am. It is a fantastic read, and as someone who grew up loving the late, great Cicely Tyson, it's a great reminder of her legacy and knowing that she was so fully in control of it up until the end. So it's a great read. It's narrated by her, and it's just like an amazing, just like chill black auntie read. And for my true crime nerds out there, there's a new release that I found out through listening to Criminal, The Unfit Heiress, The Tragic Life and Scandalous Sterilization of Anne Cooper Hewitt by Audrey, Clare, Farley. It's so good so far. Audiobooks have been super helpful for me in particular because I've been trying to walk more, and having audiobooks is a great way of helping me ignore everyone on Eastern Parkway, but also being a length of which I can go on walks. So I'll usually walk for a chapter, and it's been really good exercise helping me get back outside, especially now that my 2 weeks are up and I'm vaccinated. If these titles are of any interest to you or any other titles, visit audible.com/Melina Pendulum or text Melina Pendulum to 500-500. As you guys know, books are at the corner of what I love and part of the framework of this channel. So I'm so excited to actually be able to have an Audible sponsorship. So yeah, check out some cool books, check out some cool audiobooks, and let me know what you're reading or listening to. It's all the same. My first fandom that I actively interacted and engaged in chat boards with was probably Avatar: The Last Airbender. Harry Potter was like neck and neck in terms of influence, but in terms of me being at like the forefront of like in the message boards, it was definitely Avatar: The Last Airbender. At the ages of 14, 15, and 16, I was a loser in the like non-dramatic sense. I came from a two-parent immigrant family with a mother who worked a lot, a brother who was better at school than me, and a father who, while loved me, was very light-skinned and angry. I always felt like I had to perform to be loved in real life, and so there were pieces of myself I smothered and pushed down. Fandom became a place for me to be who I really wanted to be. Fandom is that for a lot of people. It is the mini found family that you cultivate over loving something so much. You're able to nerd out and dissect things you enjoy in a way that would be considered annoying to others, because often it is. I remember my ex-boyfriend being like, must every DC movie we come out of lead to you having an entire metatextual breakdown? And I'm like, yes, this is my shit. So exactly the same energy of like, I want to talk about the sex stuff is how I am in real life, which I'm very lucky to have a girlfriend who does the same thing with me. Love ya, babe. I have made lifelong friends that I still talk to from like avatarspirit.net, and it is that experience that makes me more than anything else want to discuss this topic. Many of us lived lives where we had no control over ourselves as teenagers, through abusive families, or just smothering families. We were stifled, and fandom, fan fiction, fan art became a way to figure out exactly who we are in this mess. That is what makes every discourse so personal. Any anti-shipper for your ship seem even more aggressive and hateful and intrusionary, because this becomes a part of who you are. And since this is the only place you have, since you can somewhat control, you want very much to feel safe and secure in that, especially if you are a survivor. Part of why these politics and discourse emerge is because we tell ourselves that if we do things the right way, we will be protected, we will find peace. That becomes the lie that gives truth that we are fighting a holy war against another side that is trying to disrupt our happiness, our joy, and poison this well of a community. And that leads to the pro and anti-shipping. Let's take a little gin sip and get into it. So pro-shipping and anti-shipping. Back in my day, these terms didn't mean the same thing they now mean. Usually you were pro, anti, and individual ship. How it got to this point, I really cannot say because I very much had to leave fandom in general because of anti-blackness. Yay! So I don't really know when this particular schism happened. The best definition of pro-shippers that I think they would agree to is not harassing someone or calling someone a criminal over fiction. It means ship and let ship, and that applies to all ships, no matter how problematic, gross, or uncomfortable the ship is. Anti-shipping in general means fans who disapprove of a ship and its shippers due to the ship being considered problematic or morally wrong. This can include incest, non-con, and other pedophilic ships, among other generally unhealthy ships. And of course, these definitions don't really mean much when a pro-shipper can call someone an anti for the mere fact that they're uncomfortable with a particular ship, and antis can call someone a pro-shipper for liking just one ship they find problematic. So either way, like if you're anyone who has even a little drop of nuance in your life, you will be waffled between these no matter what. If anything, it really feels like a flattening of nuance by making these pro-anti terms far-reaching. I like problematic ships very much, very openly, but it doesn't mean I like every single variant of that ship dynamic. For example, like I love San, I don't ship Reylo. You know, I like Zutara, I don't ship Reylo. And both sides of this spectrum say that the other is guilty of harassment, promotes genocide, child abuse, tries to get people doxxed and fired from their professional lives, and all people on these sides would probably consider themselves progressive. So it is very much an issue to me that looks like people hurting like their mirrorverse selves. As someone who definitely leans more towards like a pro-ship mentality, but thinks it's very important to include in that a space to address the fact that people are coming into fandom with different traumas and realities that need to be heard and recognized as we move forward in how we have public discussions. In this conversation about all these different ship things, I see a lot of conversation concerning anime and manga because overwhelmingly the most popular type of anime is shonen, and it's made demographically for teenage boys and will largely feature characters between the ages of 14 to 16 years old. And there are elements to that choice being because that period is seen as the perfect period of life before going into adulthood. This means that there are a lot of popular ships between characters in this age group. For example, the very popular anime manga series My Hero Academia. In the fan base, my girlfriend ships Kiribaku, which is the relationship between Kirishima and Bakugo, and I ship Todeku, which is the relationship between Todoroki Shoto and Midoriya. And I also ship Hot Wings because I'm a dirtbag. These four characters are all canonically 16 years old in the series. And I talked to a bunch of anime loving friends of mine who are all around the same age as me. So we're all either in our late 20s and early 30s. When we're talking metatextually about these characters, we know they are teenagers. They are teenagers in the choices that they make, their attitudes, and all the ways character-wise being a teenager means to their character narrative. In reading fanfic or enjoying not safe for work fan art, at least for us, they stop being their canon ages and become these sort of ageless, trapped in amber beings we think are cute together. Because the reality is that we're not going to see these characters grow up for real in the course of this series. Specifically talking about My Hero Academia. Like potentially there'll be a time skip, but that's really it. The only way they're gonna get older is maybe by like a year or something. I mean, how long has Ash Ketchum been 12 years old? But if you are consuming this product, no matter where you start, you are getting older. For example, if you were 16 years old when the My Hero Academia anime started, you were the same age as Deku and you shipped him with Bakugo, Shoto, whoever. That was 5 years ago. You're 21 now. Are you a pedophile? And also, how is it pedophilia to ship two teenagers who are the same age together? Like, also, can we just stop like using that term to just mean any age gap that makes us even slightly uncomfortable? Like, a lot of people are using that term in a way that is just deeply inappropriate and very harmful to survivors when they think that they're doing the right thing, and it's just very messy. And the answer is no. And I think insinuating that is unreasonable because we are going to grow up. These characters will not. They are characters. They are not real. And that is so important to keep in mind when we're talking about problematic shipping and what it means to like something that's problematic and what we mean by these terms. I started shipping Zutara when I was a teenager. Like, I was the same age as like Zuko and Katara, like, and I sure as hell read that smut. And I have not stopped. You know, when I read Harry Potter fan fiction, I read Hermione with everyone. I bicycled the shit out of her. Like, there was even a Lucius Malfoy Hermione fic called Eden. The shit was fire. Because it was just very well written. Like, whoever wrote that, I forget your name, but you, excellent writer. Does that mean I think that it was good for in real life? No, but I found it compelling in fiction. And that is something that I think is very simple to differentiate between. And I think that those divisions need to be understood. Even though I personally do not like it, I generally don't think that most people who have shipped an incestual ship are pro-incest in real life. These ships do not most of the time come about through a desire or interest in incest. It usually comes about for two reasons. One, there are no female characters that anyone likes in the series that they would ship with that person besides their brother, aka the Wincest problem. And two, that dynamic is one of the more interesting dynamics, and so people are like, well, let's just make it a little bit sexy, you know, or something like that. It's usually not because they're like, incest is hot. It's the character dynamics that lead to that interest. But I do understand why people are anti these ships. For a large amount of moral and ethical reasons. They should be able to discuss that and talk about that openly. I think honestly it's good fandom to have groups of people who are like, I don't like this, I think it's weird and gross. Like, word. But again, I do not think of that as a reflection of actual people's morality in general, and I think that's a good rule for thumb. There is a YA writer, I forget their name, who shipped John and Sansa on Twitter and was told not to openly ship it because there were children and teenagers who followed her. While I understand wanting to put up protections for teenage fans, for me that was always weird because at the time I was 14 and 15, I was aware of things like Flowers in the Attic. Flowers in the Attic especially because it came out in 1979 and was a huge literary success and has been turned into a movie, a like Lifetime series. It is like very much available on bookstores in the YA section and in the adult section. For all the decades of its popularity, it has never led to an uptick in incest. There is no correlation between incest ships and any sort of rationality or uptick in incest. I mean, for a long time, Wincest was the most popular ship online. There's a separation that people are not taking in good faith anymore because they want to win this morality war. And in fact, if you read Flowers in the Attic, it's actually a very dark story about child abuse. And Game of Thrones is an adult show, and unless the author was making some online excuses for incest or justifying it in real life, I don't understand how her shipping Jon and Sansa encourages teens to ship it when they can form their own opinions. And simply being online as a teenager in the late 2010s means you are being exposed to a lot of things. What matters is giving young people a space to safely discuss what is going on. Also, quite frankly, as an adult, I do not operate in fandom thinking about teenagers. I do my best to tag things that are not safe for work and other problematic things that might come up on my timeline, but I'm 29. I'm a grown-ass woman. I'm not in fandom to talk to teenagers. I'm talking to other adults. Now, all that being said, we do need to discuss what is being allowed into this pro-shipping bubble. For example, there was an incident back in 2020 concerning Confederate images where an image of a furry wearing a Confederate bikini was circulated that people correctly saw as racist. People were making excuses about how the artist wasn't American and therefore it didn't matter, and fought back against calls of racism using the term pro-shipping to say that they were anti-censorship, and if people dislike it, they should just block it and not harass the artist. Now, if you're going to be pro-shipping versus anti-censorship, those are two different things in my opinion. Like, anti-censorship is different from being pro-shipping. You cannot be so anti-censorship in a space that's supposed to be protecting people of color and marginalized people, which is what is toted around about that side of the community, that you speak over the valid issues that people have about someone putting a hate symbol on a furry image and then making all sort of gymnastics to validate that opinion. And when you see something like that, it paints a broad brush of people in this community taking the pro-ship anti-harassment perspective to places that don't be mathin'. My experience with this was sadly elevated to new levels when my friend and colleague Sarah Zed tweeted this. Provided this is even real, why bother responding to an actual child to get into an argument and dunk on them? It's a child. Just go do something else. They can't hurt you. Now, fun fact, originally I did not like this status because I am team fuck them kids, and I think this minor is saying a lot of bullshit that if you watched the first 20 something minutes of this video, you know that I fundamentally do not agree with. And I did understand Sarah's point about not platforming these kids, and I probably would have just blocked them myself, but as someone who got owned by adults as a teenager, it's good for you sometimes. Then it grew because apparently the person made these pro-shipping emblems which also featured the pink triangle on it. And it was something that I personally found to be very tacky. And when I saw it and I saw the discourse around that happening, I posted this. Considering the harassment towards BIPOC folks and the constant misinformation and reaching that make targets of prominent online women, it deeply amuses me when people treat shipping, pro and anti, with so much political importance when they literally apply that to nothing else, and to remove all nuance and context to share fake quotes and facts to perpetuate harm in order to own people over the right for two white people to kiss. When you marginalize really queer BIPOC and marginalized people, for what? The people who were pro-shipping, who got a hold of this statement, which mind you, didn't tag anyone, hashtag anything in here, were calling me names, telling me I didn't understand the situation, ripping my statement to shreds for what they assumed it meant. And when one white woman called me a privileged twat, that's when I kind of lost it. I was like, no white woman's gonna call me a privileged twat on Beyonce's internet. Like, sorry, not sorry about what I said. And then, funny enough, like a month later, she was like, we should listen to people of color. The number of white people who felt very comfortable coming into my mentions and my ads to explain to me what discrimination and privilege meant was honestly mind-blowing, especially because my point in that tweet was not pro or anti anything. When it comes to fandom, I am pro BIPOC people, specifically Black queer women, because that's what I am. But in general, I'm here about elevating the marginalized reality, and nothing about what was going on and how this symbol was about specifically Hannibal had anything to do with Blackness. And it was something that I just kind of felt like, you guys are saying that you're standing up for Black people and BIPOC people, except when they disagree with you. People who attempted to speak to myself, Sarah, and Lindsay Ellis about the reasons why pro-shippers were concerned about this larger issue were called names. It became a period of seeing especially them get flooded with names, while the fact that I was a Black queer woman who had also been belittled was erased because it didn't fit into their little narrative. Because it's very easy. And then that I think happens a lot in fandom. It's very easy to put like all of the onus on the most privileged person in the room, while ignoring that this is not just happening to white women. This happens to women of color, it happens to black women especially, trans women, everybody. But they'll always target, oh, this privileged person, they just don't get it because they're white women, the worst kind. And I'm just like, I mean, whatever, sure, okay. But like, you weren't just talking to white women. You do this to black women all the time. Which brings me to how BIPOC people are used in this situation. The characters and ships that we are being made to defend outside of anime are white. Our opinions are pit against each other, while the core problem of racism in fandom is ignored and put onto one side of this pro-anti-binary. And I hate to tell ya, but no side is pure, because both sides are invested in using the experiences of harmed people to prove a point, rather than making sure those harms are not repeated. Instead of focusing on fixing existing problems, they are consumed with proving one side is creating more potential future harm. For black fans, that means getting pulled out whenever there are accusations of racism being brought out and being used like Negro sock 'em boppers for white allies who are trying to prove neither of them are really racist. This is not meant to invalidate these issues, but sometimes I think audiences are asking a lot of and projecting a lot onto especially white people on these platforms in a way that is unproductive and honestly not the place of white people to do so. And with people of color, it also doesn't help because we're not a monolith. Read with Cindy has a great video where she brings up the book Deadly Education by Naomi Novak, where there's a lot of discourse about the half Indian lead character, and there are a lot of people who feel seen by the character who's half Indian, and there are others who feel that they wish the character was more Indian. These are conversations that we should be having, but they are appropriate and used to elevate agendas that have nothing to do with BIPOC people in many ways. They are about clout chasing. It makes it so that I am hyper wary about ever disagreeing with certain black people in public because I don't want our disagreement to become something people use to harm us. And so I silence myself in advance. Okay, this is so fucking long. For me, purity culture is dangerous because it never actually helps victims. It keeps them silent. It weaponizes their existence without leaving them resources. Fandom's moralistic hyper need to justify everything that they like has created an environment where people are learning to validate bad behavior, where we can't just like a bad character for being evil. We need to metatextualize every single action to justify what they do. This is not a helpful environment, and it certainly creates a difficult path to tread if you are just a young person just trying to enjoy something without getting a million conversations about why this thing is inherently bad and shouldn't you feel bad for liking Zutara. And honestly, many people feel very comfortable projecting onto other people, very quick to attach blame to folks without any evidence. You cringe from receipts when the use of them is being asked for to avoid the puritanical cultures. Asking for proof of harm when you are accusing people of doing harm is not invalidating that perspective. It's making sure victims are being heard and people aren't using genuine concerns to harm others. Because the harsh reality is that people lie. We have seen people fake being black women for clout online and in real life. We have seen a trans woman fake being harmed for a GoFundMe. So if you're claiming people like myself or Sarah or any black woman who talks about fandom in the space of being suicide baiting, of belonging to a child sex cult with a body count, of repeating rad femme agenda, and of supporting people who want Hannibal creator Brian Folder to die, isn't it fair that we asked for proof of any of this? Let's go back to the Satanic Panic for a moment and focus on one particular incident that took place during this: the McMartin preschool trial. In 1983, members of the McMartin family who ran a preschool were accused of committing multiple acts of sex abuse to the children in their care. It started when one woman, Judy Johnson, reported that she believed her son had been assaulted by her estranged husband and McMartin teacher Ray Buckley. Johnson accused that people at the daycare had had sex with animals and that Ray was flying in the sky like a witch. The police then sent letters to parents warning them about these accusations.
But then they sent out this letter to some 200 families, instructing them to question their children about sodomy, oral sex, and fondling.
And these parents ended up very much pressuring their children into making false accusations. This ended up leading to several hundred children being interviewed by the now shamed Key McFarlane. By spring of 1984, it was claimed that 360 children had been abused by this preschool. These children claimed that they saw witches fly, travel in hot air balloons, were going around in underground tunnels, and other outlandish things, but there was no proof for any of this. But it did not stop people from A, thinking that they were guilty, and 2 trials taking place. The case altogether lasted 7 years and cost $15 million. Okay? American. It is the longest and most expensive criminal case in the history of the United States legal system, and it resulted in zero convictions. And this is only one incident of many of these sex abuse scandals in nurseries that took place during the Satanic Panic. In The Devil in the Nursery, Margaret Talbot for the New York Times summarized the case as follows. When you once believed something that now strikes you as absurd, even unhinged, it can be almost impossible to summon that level of credulity again. Maybe that is why it's easier for most of us to forget rather than try and explain the satanic abuse scare that gripped this country in the early 80s. The myth that the devil worshippers had set up shop in our daycare centers, where their clever adepts were raping and sodomizing children, practicing ritual sacrifice, shedding their clothes, drinking blood, and eating feces, all unnoticed by parents, neighbors, and the authorities. It is very easy for rumors, unproven things, to become fact if you are invested in believing in it and do not care to fact check, because it is much easier and convenient for you to have that fake narrative than the truth. The inability to see nuance while asking for nuance will fuck you every time. With all of that all out of the way, let's talk ships. Netflix released Avatar: The Last Airbender for streaming, and when it was put on the platform, the hot takes emerged. Honestly, it was a mistake. Among the many conversations that were brought back from the dregs of 2009 was the Zutara versus Kang conflict. With this relitigation of my adolescence, a question was being asked of Zutara shippers, especially Zutara shippers of color. How can someone ship Zutara when Zuko is a colonizer? I even finally checked my Tumblr and saw someone asking me how I still ship Zutara despite all the colonization issues that are being brought up. I'm gonna give my big brain, I've thought deeply about this question answer, and then I'm going to explain how I really feel about the topic. So, how can someone ship Zutara when Zuko is a colonizer? For the record, Zutara is the relationship between Zuko and Katara in the show. Zuko is the prince of the Fire Nation, and Katara is the last waterbender of the Southern Water Tribe. I tackled the issue of the Fire Nation as an imperial force in the video I did about cartoons and Empire, which is probably the video that a lot of you guys know me for now, which is or actually Katy Perry. It's one or the other now. In summation of my point in that video, I don't think the story of Avatar: The Last Airbender is built to hold up to a really in-depth exploration of how to decolonize an empire once that empire has been made illegitimate. It is about the journey of ending the evil empire, and that's really as far as the deep thought of it goes. The continuation comics made that really clear, and in my mind, the fact that there is even still a Fire Nation, considering they committed like 3 genocides, tells me that Aang being besties with the new Fire Lord is amazing. So how does Zutara, the ship, fit into this discourse? Well, when it comes to any relationship between Zuko and Katara, I think it's important to look at their relationship after they go on their almost revenge mission. There's a lot of work in showing these two are friends. Therefore, Zutara's relationship is not one of giving Katara to Zuko as a reward. They are equals in battle. Katara is the daughter of a Seven Water Tribe chieftain. Katara is also probably, factually, a better bender than he is anyway. So Katara wins. Fatality. If we're talking about this purely from the colonization level, then of all the options Zuko could pick to be with that are cis women, other than Suki, Katara is very much the best wife. Daughter of a tribe that you oppressed, someone who has proven to be empathetic to other nations, including the Fire Nation folks, a la the Painted Lady episode, so people wouldn't think that she was just there seeking revenge. Marrying someone from outside the Fire Nation would be an absolutely great way of showing solidarity outside of that nation. It would also ensure that future generations of Fire Lord would have a parent who was directly affected by the genocides, especially considering that there was a de facto superior race element to the whole thing when it came to the Fire Nation. If Zuko did marry someone like Mai, she is someone who is his canon love interest in the show, but somehow still not confirmed to be his baby mama in Korra. Have they confirmed that yet? I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. She is someone whose family was directly involved with controlling part of the Earth Kingdom, which probably wouldn't be very good PR. As Fire Lady, or whatever title she would have, Katara would also have legitimate political power to fight injustice. She could help reallocate funds to the Water Tribe. And because they are friends, they fought together against evil. It has all of the narratives of a great political love story, you know, baby, just say yes. But none of that is the reason I ship Zutara. I ship Zutara because I used to go on this website that was just pictures of like cartoon characters, I forget what it's called, and I clicked on Avatar: The Last Airbender and I saw Katara and I was like, oh my god, she's beautiful and she's brown. That's really exciting. I saw the image of Zuko holding the necklace around her neck in the waterbending scroll and I was like, ooh, sexy. And then I saw the quote, "I'll save you from the pirates," and I was like, and when you grow up watching series that are very much like enemies to lovers are a very clear possibility, I was like, ooh, maybe that's what's gonna happen with these two crazy kids. Then I watched the episode and it was not the sexy times I was hoping for, but I still shipped it. And I was probably 15, 16 when I started watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, so the idea of a 14-year-old girl dating a 12-year-old boy was disgusting to me. I was like, absolutely not. And he's beautiful, adorable, love him, but I was like, he a child. And I do legitimately respect and understand people who are like, nah, not for me. I find the dynamics too polarizing. Like, whatever, I think that's a very valid reason to not ship something. But to me, the show itself isn't taking these issues seriously enough that I'm going to stop shipping what I like for the sake of a show that isn't talking about these subjects as deeply as other people want me to think about it to explain Zutara and enjoy my smut. It's just, plus the show didn't really address the political aspects of their friendship, which is key to understanding why some fans may not think about those implications when it comes to a romantic relationship. If we're meant to be okay with Zuko becoming a member of the gang, why is it crossing a line for him to date Katara? And that's a very personal choice in how I choose to see it that changes with every ship. Now, my biggest issue with this question being asked isn't that it's being asked, is that it's asked almost solely to Zutara shippers when Zuka especially has grown in popularity, Zuka being the relationship between Zuko and Sokka. To me, that is indicative of the way that women of color's bodies get policed and how colonization, slavery, and imperialism always become a way to portray women of color as traitors to their race if they are somehow in a relationship, quote unquote, with a white man. Bedwench is a derogatory term used to describe a woman of African descent who is in a relationship with a white man. The term comes from a history of women of African descent being forced into relationships with white men through slavery, mostly through rape, but also any black woman who may have been able to make some choice in the matter and trying to navigate, the best harm reduction for themselves. I put choice in quotes because I don't know if you can really make the best choices for yourself under slavery, but still, I don't want to remove autonomy from those who may have made an informed choice. You have the woman named Mariana, who was an indigenous woman from the Mexican Gulf Coast, who played a very key role in the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, acting as an interpreter, advisor, and intermediary for the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez. She was one of 20 enslaved women that was given to the Spaniards by the natives of Tabasco in 1519. She later gave birth to Cortez's first son, Martin, who is considered one of the first mestizos, people of mixed European and indigenous American ancestry. Her legacy has painted her as this traitor, and there is a whole term called a malinchista, which refers to a disloyal compatriot, especially in Mexico. Yet this is a woman who was enslaved since childhood and sold to Cortez. While she carries a whole name that is considered derogatory, I'm like, Cortez should be the slur. I mean, he's the conquistador. Matoka, who is known mostly through her Disney-fied name of Pocahontas, was also a translator, but then was captured when she was a teenager and held for ransom. She was presented to English society as an example of a civilized savage, in hopes of stimulating investment in the Jamestown settlement. She then married John Rolfe during the time where she was a captive and was very much used as a prop in parts of her life. Legislation was also made to allow her descendants with Rolfe to keep their land and their whiteness, to the fact that even known racist First Lady Edith Wilson, wife of Woodrow Wilson, was very proud to say she was a descendant of Pocahontas. Meanwhile, she was a plantation-owning, segregationist-loving twat. I put all this in here to say that there is a long colonial history of being hypercritical of women of color in precarious situations being forced into relationships with colonizers, which then gets weaponized against them in history. That has been passed down today to women of color who face the same scrutiny, even though the majority of women of color try to marry within their race. But when they happen to marry outside of their race, it ends up being an entire thing about how they, as the, womb havers, are, letting the black family down or whatever bullshit. I have had black men and once a black woman make public comments about me and my white male partner at the time, commenting that it looked like slavery, which is sexist, racist, and a fucking horrible thing to say about a black woman, considering that A, I am a descendant of slaves, so fuck you, and B, projecting your sexism onto me using the pain of slavery is fundamentally anti-black. Like, double fuck you. It also goes into an issue that for a lot of women of color, our personal patriarchal struggles are with our own fathers, brothers, uncles who have internalized the toxic masculinity and colonial mindsets of patriarchy and push it onto us. In the end, if we ignore that they are also capable of that, we end up just policing women of color's bodies. Because again, while we are dealing with the discussion of colonization when it comes to Zutara, Zuka is still really popular. And wouldn't all the same issues with Zuko and Katara affect Zuko and Sokka? Oh, also, in the beginning of the series, who is telling Katara to stay in the kitchen and was sexist. Sokka. Which waterbending master was telling Katara that she couldn't be a waterbender because she a female? Paku, I don't call him master because I'm free, but like, let's keep it 100. When it comes to who women of color date and marry, unless she is in the sunken place, every relationship has to be balanced with the realities that oppressive mentalities are everywhere. While it is valuable to have these conversations, there needs to be a separation between that and performative actions in fandom that boils down to just harassing people who like a ship, and especially shaming black and brown women who are enjoying seeing a brown female character date a visibly Asian guy. Reylo. The real race war. All right, let's get into this. The big question: is Reylo inherently racist? No. Okay, I guess I should go deeper into this already long video about this topic that's so fucking exhausting. Alright, when Star Wars The Force Awakens teaser trailer was released, the first person you see pop up is Finn.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Played by John Boyega after a voiceover that implies like deep narrative importance. And my reaction when I saw this scene was block, 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 block. That reaction is because I was familiar with Boyega from the hit film Attack the Block, and him being elite in Star Wars was exciting. We had Samuel L. Jackson, a black American man in the prequels. We had Lando Calrissian, played by Billy D. Williams, who is half West Indian, and then we had Nigerian Boyega. But those two previous characters were very much supporting roles. But Boyega's Finn was set up from the posters of him holding the lightsaber and everything that he was advertising, that he was supposed to be the Jedi, trademark incorporated. And then you watch the movie and it's Rey is actually the chosen one, and in the end of the first movie, Finn ends up in a coma because of Kylo Ren's daddy issues, and it's very obnoxious. This is the great splintering. The people who have really attached to Rey and love the series for her and the fact that it's a female Jedi in a live action movie, yay, blah, blah, blah. And then there are the blacks, who are like, we came here for Black Jedi, and we did not get what we paid for. The Last Jedi really overemphasized the relationship between Kylo and Kylo and Rey, putting Finn's journey to a side quest, and really heavily made Reylo even more of a thing in fandom. And for the record, as I've said before, I really do actually like The Last Jedi. It's my favorite of the sequel trilogy, but I also understand that Boyega and others don't feel like the story did justice to the characters, specifically when his antagonistic figure is just passed so easily, a lot to do, and the side quest does not feel fulfilling. And if you continue on to Rise of Skywalker, where he has nothing to do but chase after a white woman, it's like he had no real point in the narrative except to meet Rey and like magic her into this journey. And that's the core of this issue. It isn't Reylo inherently, it is that the Reylo dynamic became the core of the series in these latter two movies that gave the two non-white characters nothing to do. I put white in quotation marks because I believe that Oscar Isaacs, I believe I don't know his particular ethnic makeup, and I don't like to make assumptions about that because it's complicated, but we're just gonna say like the two non-WAS characters. The representation that was supposed to be at the core of this entire series ended up mattering less and less as the story progressed, until the two white characters took up the entire series. Even Finpo, which is really popular, did not get any real significant screen time and was carried by the actors alone. It didn't account for most of the marketing and storytelling. Let's not forget even that Poe and Rey do not meet until the end of The Last Jedi.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Poe.
Rey.
I know.
Like, think about that. And here's the thing too, I don't even think that The Last Jedi ends in a pro Reylo way. I think it opened the door completely for Finray, honestly. They could totally be Jedi training and hanging out happily ever after in the next movie. Next movie comes and it's Rey and Kylo tension taking up the majority of the character stuff. But why does shipping end up becoming such a big deal if it's about representation, you might be asking? Who ya fuck in a series is very important to your screen time. Like, it's top tier importance, y'all. I grew up with The Vampire Diaries, and it was a show where everybody got to swap boyfriends all the time, right? Except for Bonnie. Caroline, she got all the prime cut of meat boyfriends. Klaus, Stefan, Matt, Tyler. Well, maybe not Tyler. She got everybody good. Meanwhile, Bonnie got Jeremy, who I hate, and who cheated on her with a ghost. Then she gets with some other dude who is irrelevant. Kai? Is that his name? I don't know. Look at the Jenny Nicholson video. I don't know who he is. All this time I'm just like, in the books where she was a white woman, she got to be with Damon as a love interest. On the show, Kat Graham and Ian Somerhalder as Damon have great chemistry. Why don't they date?
Because you, Bonnie Bennett, are an amazing woman. A mediocre crossword puzzle player. And my best friend.
Why indeed? But listen, you're like, Princess, Melina, that's just one example, girl. Is this a reach? Well, girl, let me space jam it up for you. Let's take another fandom. Wynonna Earp, show I love. A white woman with two love interests, right? One black man, other white man. In the first season, it's like, oh, we equalizing it. Okay, we the equalizer, Denzel, right? Then in the second season, several things happen that give greater importance to the white man, including making him the father of Wynonna's child, while the black man's screen time and storylines are mostly wrapped up in white people. And then he dies at the beginning of the third season, and the white man and the white woman end up being the end game, and no other really black men in the show doth appear, or black people. Whenever actually the one time a black woman does appear in Wynonna Earp, she's terrible. Half dies to save a white woman and then we never see her again. What happened to Kate? So that's another one, but you want more? Okay, let's do it, okay? I got more for you. Let's do Supergirl. White woman's love interest is set up to be James Olsen, as played by delicious black actor Mehcad Brooks. Watch Mortal Kombat, y'all. On CBS, they're set up as a couple, right? And the series ends with them about to go on a date. But during the move to the CW that is treated in the premiere episode of season 2, they don't go out for some reason, and her love interest is now a white man. Okay? James stays and ends up becoming a love interest to Lena Luthor, but fandom hates him because he's in the way of Supercorp, which is the relationship between Supergirl Kara Danvers and Lena Luthor. The mostly white writers have no idea what to do with him, put him in really mediocre plot lines. Eventually, actor leaves the show. Are you beginning to see the pattern I'm speaking of here? Let's see who else I can think of. There is the total vilification of Chuck on Riverdale, the death of Hale on Lost Girl, the fact that people still ship Alex with her fake Mexican girlfriend over her black girlfriend Kelly, the fandom treatment of every black actress in a DC show, BBC show. Do you see where I'm going here? It's a trend. For a long time, a lot of black actors sort of just accepted that it was going to happen. You know, Candice Patton was fighting this on multiple fronts, but even she had to be much quieter, and she's always being put in diversity panels when I'm sure she just wants to just hang out with her beautiful dog. Boyega has been outspoken about his experiences as a black man in this corporate system, and about how even he saw himself as being set up to be elite and then was pushed aside for white characters, and how the fandom's treatment of him on top of the racism has been very exhausting. I feel like a lot of white women say in the discussion about Reylo that they were being called racist. And once again, fandom was dunking on women and what things that women liked without these white women really looking deeper into what was being said in the core issues, which also puts black Reylo fans in this position of where they have to exist in two spaces that are seemingly contradictory when it's not that deep. A lot of the specific animosity was around the way that certain white women in fandom championed Reylo in a way that made John Boyega into a sex pest in their eyes. For example, when one writer who worked for Nerdist, therefore giving her statements more clout, took a quote from Boyega out of context and used it as a way to present John Boyega as being sexist to Kelly Marie Tran, who played Rose Tico, and calling her weak. They later apologized for this, but the issue loaded into that incident was that it was easier for people to be protective over Kelly Marie Tran than John Boyega. Very much evocative of the way that a lot of white feminists are not really educated on how to be allies to black men. This also happened along the lines with the laying down the pipe incident. And the sharing of that article, which was calling the Reylo hate a perpetuation of the sexism that women face online, which I did a whole video about. But in terms of the laying down the pipe thing, like, so in response to an Instagram follower who suggested that, who basically implied that because Kylo died, that meant that, you know, Finn and Rey was good, Boyega joked in a response, it's not about who she kisses, but who eventually lays the pipe. You are a genius. The comment riled up people who accused him of misogyny, and one user said, bro, you are extremely disgusting and gross, also fucking disrespectful. You can't be this jealous of Adam Driver, dude. What? It's like John Boyega makes a joke in AAV about two fictional characters and people take it to him wanting to have sex with his co-star and being jealous of his other co-star, making a black man come across as a sexual predator for a ship. Also, the person who called him out was apparently a blackfisher, so that's great. A lot of people, including people I really like and respect, got caught up in turning this conversation into something that was specifically about women and ignoring that there was an intersection between race and gender going on. But I also feel like people were being labeled as inherently racist when really what they were was ill-equipped to really tackle this subject and not being asked to do so. As someone who really appreciates Jenny Nicholson and Jenny Nicholson's content, I don't think that she is racist. I don't think that she has any grudge against John Boyega or hates John Boyega. I think that's to me, that's a reach personally. What I do think is that she was responding, as many white women were, to the feeling of having something that you see a lot of women like being treated and maligned in media, and that happens frequently. But I do not think that many people outside of the black community and the allies were having this specific conversation until after the rise of Skywalker. And I think that's inherently the problem, is that fandom culture ends up being a hive mind of whiteness. And even when black fans are in it, their thoughts and opinions are not what is rising to the surface. And if you are aligned with a certain team, then you must act in connection to that team rather than having an honest conversation about how you feel, especially when she was hardly the only person who was quick to reduce it to, well, do you think he deserves a white woman? It was always, at least it should always have been, about the narrative trends that Reylo's prominence was perpetuating and the fact that a lot of black and brown fans were disappointed by the choices that were made, especially highlighting Rey. I already have my white brunette of choice in the Star Wars fandom. Her name is Padme Amidala, baby.
Say something about the motherfucking prequels, bitch.
more white female empowerment being fed to me as the most important thing when we had more Latino and Black representation pushed aside for Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley. And for the record, I don't ship Reylo mainly because I think Kylo Ren is an underdeveloped character who could be interesting but isn't, and I don't find Adam Driver attractive in that form. He's too smooth. I think Adam Driver was his most attractive in Black Klansman, which is unfortunate. I have special earrings for this section of the video. These were a gift from my girlfriend. I'm gonna say at the top that this section is going to be one major trigger warning because there's a lot to unpack here. While I'm not going to get into detail, I'm going to be discussing the definitions of grooming, and if you want to in general skip over this section, I understand. Time code here. In 2020, a spin-off series of the popular romance shonen anime Inuyasha was announced called Yashahime. It was going to star the twin half-demon daughters of supporting character in the original series Shishomaru, as well as the one-third demon child of Inuyasha and Kagome, the protagonists of the original series. The series did not share at the beginning who the mother of Shishomaru's children would be, but it was very quickly realized and later confirmed to be Rin, a character who was 8 years old in the original series, while Shishomaru is a centuries-old semi-immortal demon. This was and has been a deeply controversial issue in the Inuyasha fandom, and I initially was going to do a whole video about this like months ago, but I kind of felt like it was incomplete, especially because Yashahime wasn't done at the time. And if you want to see my thoughts on it, you can see it on my Patreon. It has been something that I've struggled with discussing because there is a lot of genuine pain and stress and triggers to be dealt with, but I also see a lot of this, again, purity throwing that is lacking a lot of conscientious thought about the people who are shipping these things. What I see in this space of discussing SessRin is the folding of a lot of different online issues, but especially the way terms like pedophilia and grooming are thrown out in a way that is really meant to end conversation. Do I think that SessRin in the series Yashahime is supporting child grooming or sexual assault or pedophilia? No. Does it make the way the ship was portrayed in the show not problematic and troubling? Also no. So why do I not think SessRin, as shown in canon, is not child sexual assault, grooming, or pedophilia? The reason is because the signs of it are not present in the series. I'm getting this definition of grooming from Rain, and while yes, grooming can take many different forms, this is what the general breakdown of it, especially as it concerns children. 1. Victim selection. Abusers often observe possible victims and select them based on ease of access to them or their perceived vulnerability. Gaining access and isolating the victim. Abusers will attempt to physically or emotionally separate a victim from those protecting them and often seek out positions in which they have contact with minors. Trust development and keeping secrets. Abusers attempt to gain trust of potential victims through gifts, attention, sharing secrets, and other means to make them feel that they have a caring relationship and train them to keep the relationship secret. Desensitization to touch and discussion of sexual topics. Abusers will often start to touch a victim in ways that appear harmless, such as hugging, wrestling, and tickling, and later escalate to increasingly more sexual contact, such as massages or showering together. Abusers may also show the victim pornography or discuss sexual topics with them, or introduce the idea of sexual contact. Attempt by abusers to make their behavior seem natural, to avoid raising suspicions. For teens who may be closer in age to the abuser, it can be particularly hard to recognize tactics used in grooming. Be alert for signs that your teen has a relationship with an adult that includes secrecy, undue influence or control, or pushes personal boundaries. None of this happened in Inuyasha between Shishomaru and Rin. Period. Shishomaru never seeks to isolate Rin from anyone. In fact, they are almost always accompanied by Aoun and Jaqen. As soon as Naraku is defeated, Rin lives with other people in Kaede's village. Yeah, Sesshomaru gives Rin new kimonos, but he is not seen in any way as using these interactions as a way of seducing her or grooming her. In fact, they actually have very little physical contact because Sesshomaru is just not a very sexual being. In fact, in the anime, there's a whole episode where it shows that he would absolutely let her go off with humans if that's what she wanted, but it wasn't. What people are trying to say through using terms like grooming is that they see Sesshomaru and Rin's relationship as a paternal one, and that if they became a couple due to the power dynamics and age difference, it would automatically be for them a violation because of those issues, and therefore reminds them of grooming, which is an absolutely 1000% valid reading of the situation if that is your perspective. But what if you don't view them as father and daughter? People kind of had this inability to see adults who interact with children as anything but predatory, and that's part of the problem because that's not true to life. And more importantly, it doesn't give kids the tools they need to identify red flags. Rather, it just situates them to fear and take on responsibility to protect themselves, which leads to victim blaming. For example, what if you started watching Sesshomaru at like 12, 13 years old, and you had a crush on Sesshomaru, and because you had a crush on him, Rin becomes your avatar for that affection, and you're like, oh my god, when she grows up, they can be together because she's the only person he's nice to. And now you're in your 20s, SessRin is canon, and the kid in you is excited, but you are being called a supporter of grooming and pedophilia because of it. And the thing about it too, like, what if you are a victim of child sexual assault and father figures are not your safety? And therefore seeing Sesshomaru as a father figure was never even your lens of thinking because you don't equate fathers with safety. What if the person who was your protector was your partner? These are nuances to this conversation that we aren't even allowed to touch because we have painted things with language that imply a very black and white mentality. What I will say is that the way that Yashahime handled Rin is loaded with sexism and problematic writing that only can make you see the worst in it. Because one, Rin has no autonomy, and two, Sesshomaru and Rin do not interact. It really just makes Rin a broodmare, and I despise that more than anything. To me, I think the best version of Sesshomaru and Rin would have been like Emma and Mr. Knightley in Jane Austen's Emma. Emma, who would be like the Rin, is the protagonist. We get to see her mind, her feelings, and she'd be the star in this story. For me, the reason why Emma Knightley works, even though they have a big age difference, and Mr. Knightley has been in Emma's life since she was a child, is because Emma is very much established to be her own person. She and Knightley have arguments of wit. She is not just enraptured with him, and you can see they both have mutual respect and frustrations with each other. She was not groomed into the perfect person for him. They are just well matched. There would always be people who took issue with canon SessRin, which I think is absolutely fair. But I think that if they made the show about Inuyasha Kagome's daughter with adult Rin as a demon slayer or a Miko or whatever, navigating these new emerging feelings that she would have for Sesshomaru, who was her protector, and now as an adult she may see it in a different light. That is an organic story. But shonen gonna shonen. There is a larger part of this conversation about how we deal with the way anime and manga handles age gaps and how that translates in the West. We have our own issues with the way we hypersexualize children, and if that clip from Girl Meets World is any indicator, y'all need to discuss that.
Maya, he's 17 and you're 14? Yeah. That might seem like a really big age difference now, but here in college, we learn a really difficult math.
Yeah. And when you get here, you'll be 18 and he'll be 21. And the good news is that he'll be smarter because he'll be in college.
And he just may be smart enough to look at you differently.
Huh? Because I'll always shade Clamp for their problematic behavior, but at least Clamp makes the girls look like children, and so I can be like, this thing not thangin', the math, no. Like, I've never read a Clamp age difference relationship and shipped it, because one looks like a big-eyed baby and one is a big-eyed tall person, and I'm like, no. What we do in media is we cast these adult actors to play teenagers, put them in hypersexual situations so that we are just desensitized to the fact that these kids are doing these vile things, and then it's like, we made them adults, so it's fine. And also, I will say, yes, age differences and age power differential should be looked at, but in fantasy, can we just sort of have like a crumb of nuance? Like, we are talking about a fantasy series, especially in terms of Inuyasha, where characters can live for centuries and they don't age the same way we do. It's like when people want to make the argument of like vampire, like that Edward's like a pedophile because he's like a vampire dating Bella, and it's like, listen, no. He's a vampire. Like, on the list of problematic stuff, maybe this makes me problematic and a bad person. Those things don't bother me. I'm like, the people who are abusing power dynamics and grooming are not getting this techniques from anime. Like, we get that from in real life ways that we treat young girls. Hey, I was editing this video and I didn't like the conclusion that I had pre-written when I was actually looking at it in the edit. And I know that when you do these kind of video essays about these topics, there is a way that the scripted format can make you seem disingenuous. And because this is a topic that is very important to me, and I think very important to the communities of fandom that I do love, I wanted my conclusion to be a little bit more authentically me. So here we go. When I was a teenager, because I was skipped a grade, I was always the youngest in school. I was very much a sheltered kid in certain aspects. And as I was entering adulthood, as I was entering teenhood, and I was starting to like develop and everything like that, I was very aware of the way men would look at me, but also very unwilling to talk about that with my parents, largely because I didn't want my already overprotective father to be even more overprotective. I didn't want the little bit of freedom I had to be taken from me. And also I wanted to fit in. I wanted to fit in with my slightly older classmates who were more mature than me. And in a lot of ways, especially when you're a girl of color, and as I explained in my girlhood video, you're already hypersexualized. You're already treated as if you should know things about sex and intimacy. And so for me, I very much wanted to feel it, but feel in control. And that led to me, and it's very embarrassing to talk about, but I would go on those chats and I would pretend to be slightly older or just would be my age and would like talk to these older men because I wanted to feel like I had some control of my sexuality. And that wasn't because I came from a troubled background. It was because I didn't have an adult in my life that I felt comfortable talking about my sexual feelings with, what I was feeling and how I was developing and changing. And it's something that I deeply regret. That period of my life, I think is and it was only like a couple of months, but it like haunted me endlessly because I felt as I got older and my feelings would change and I began to even more develop, felt like I was inherently dirty. I read non-con fanfic from time to time. No, I need to say I read non-con fic as part of my thing, and I realized at a fairly not young age, but like I realized in my teens that I had a thing for that. Like I liked seeing it in media, I liked reading it in stories, and for a long time I felt like it was even more of an indicator that I was a bad person, that I was dirty, that I was slutty, that I was going to go to hell. Definitely that I was going to go to hell. That I was going to go to hell for masturbating too. I remember when that period where I was worried about that sexualization I had done. I was like, I remember making a promise to God that like, if I stop masturbating, you won't let me get in trouble for that. Sex was just always something that I never felt fully comfortable in. And a lot of decisions I made that I am not proud of were made because I was afraid. And I didn't have an adult or anyone older who I could trust to go with that situation. Even my older sister, you know, I love her, but we didn't have that kind of relationship where I felt comfortable talking to her about sex. My mom worked, my dad, light skin, couldn't go to him. What actually helped me a lot was fan fiction, was realizing that the things I was feeling were normal, that a lot of women have those kind of rape fantasies, and that it's not that you actually want to be raped. It is that, especially for someone like me who has such severe anxiety, even sex is not something where you can turn your break if you always have to be in some kind of control. And the non-con fic was a way for me to read about someone having no control and enjoying that, which something that I personally did not know how to do. It took me until my late 20s to actually have sex where I wasn't anxious and in my mind constantly. I understand the importance of being in a space where you can enjoy things that are part of your sexuality, and also to start to realize what you like and what you don't like. There have been things that I've read in fic, I'm like, oh, that seems sexy, and then I'll try it in a safe space and I'm like, oh, I don't actually like that, but that's okay, I can just read it, I don't have to do it. And being able to learn how to navigate those things are so important. And I didn't get to do that till later in life. And you might say, well, it's a good thing because you weren't abused. No. Like, I wasn't abused in terms of having like sexual assault, but I mentally, I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know how to ask for what I wanted. And I didn't know how to really trust any figure to go to, because I hadn't been taught how to do that. I didn't know how to do that. And that's why when I see these conversations about like, you know, protecting new children from these things, are you protecting them or are you stopping them from ever feeling comfortable asking questions to you? But that's my perspective on it, and that's why I understand the pro-ship dilemma of not wanting the things that you find some kind of sexual titillation in fiction, pure fiction, to be treated that way. And of course there are limits to that. Of course there are going to be people who push back against that, and that is normal. What I think happens quite so often, and I see happening all the time, are the Black and brown women who get silenced, at Black and brown folks who get silenced in fandom because they don't toe whatever particular line. And it's both sides. I don't bring them up in the video, but I have mutuals who have their accounts locked. There's a whole longer section that I cut about a friend of mine who was getting harassment, but I didn't want her to get more potentially, so I cut her out of the video. These are Black and brown folks who are trying to share their perspective in fandom, who are trying to discuss racism in fandom. And the response to that is to be treated as if they're trying to vilify everybody. There is a limit to these conversations that is happening because we don't know how to talk about these things with each other. Because the point is not to discuss our differences, it is to attack each other. It is to take terms that are so loaded and so dark and throw them like darts and hope that one of them stick. And one point that Sarah made on Twitter is that once these rumors get circulated, they become the narrative. I will see rumors that I know are not true on little message boards that I still look at. I see over and over again people wanting to dunk on Black and brown fans because they dislike a certain white person. When the Noelle Stevenson situation happened with the slave joke that was made in the chat, Noelle handled it as well as they could. I was disappointed by the statement. I said so on Twitter, but I don't hate Noelle. I don't hate Shira. I was disappointed, but it was just a reminder for me, white people, even white people who can get shot at a Black Lives protest, get injured at a Black Lives Matter protest, can still have gaps in their education that show up, especially when they're in a space with no Black people around them. And that's something that they, moving forward, need to correct. I think that's a valid criticism. I don't blame any Black person or brown person who doesn't want to watch the show, because to them, they're like, I don't like that, I don't want to support them. Totally valid. The amount of white folks I saw going like, we told you so, we told you this was this, we told you this was that, we told you, and it was used to own Black and brown fans. That is what I remember more than anything. That these were people who wanted to prove a point, who didn't want to have discourse, who didn't want to have nuance, who wanted very much to litigate what we liked, to litigate what we found connections with. And I personally really dislike that because I am someone who is hypercritical of things that I love. Most of my favorite shows, I am hella critical of. Like, I love Gilmore Girls, but I also hate it. So like, Lost Girl, love that show. Hugely impactful for me. Will always criticize it about race. Winona Earp, love it. Follow Emily Andress. They follow me back. Still hypercritical of the show. There is no need to attack and harm Black and brown people for engaging in problematic content, because when it comes to being a BIPOC person in this world, most content that we enjoy will contain something like that. What matters is moving the needle forward and letting our voices be heard, not weaponizing painful, problematic situations to harm and attack us when we are on the opposite side of an opinion than you. And that is what I see happening. And when it comes to issues like harassment, I think what everyone needs to understand is that when you have a certain platform, yes, there will be positive critique, there will be good faith critique, but also a lot of bullshit. A lot of bullshit. I have gotten people saying bullshit in my mentions and then getting mad when I defend myself in my mentions. I had that in the video, but I cut it out because it was too long. But the summation of it is that there are people who will take a situation where someone is problematic and use it to weaponize their grievances, regardless of context, regardless of receipts, but they will do so because they feel like, as a smaller person in terms of content, that they are allowed to say whatever they want, and that person cannot respond. That is ridiculous. And if you go look at like people like Kalechi, look at Jackie Aina, who gets issues all the time, like, this is not something that just happens to white women. What happens is that when it happens to white women, everyone collectively say, well, they're white, they have this platform, they're gonna be okay. Harassment is also going into people's ads, calling them names, trying to misrepresent what they said intentionally to prove a point, and making every single mistake that a person does connect to a grievance you had 700 tweets ago. It's not productive, it's not helpful, and if you really want to stop supporting these white people that you think are problematic, that you don't like, how about supporting some of the many amazing Black and brown channels out there that are doing really great work, that are being engaging, that are thoughtful content, but recognize that those people will also make mistakes. I have made mistakes publicly. I struggle all the time if I should keep up my old videos because I know I've made mistakes in them. I know there is language I use in it that I would not use now, but I try to keep it up there so that I can be transparent about my flaws. If we want to protect fandom and make it a safe place for everybody, that means A, tagging your stuff, B, don't go looking for situations that have nothing to do with you, and did I start with A or B? I guess C. And 3 or C, whichever ones it end up being, understand that the person that you're talking to, you don't know their life. You don't know their trauma. You do not know anything about them besides what you're projecting onto them half the time. It doesn't make anybody better when you treat people badly. Older fans, yes, you may see some of these younger fans with their politics and being hyper annoyed by them, but remember when you were hyper annoying? Remember when you would use these terms to describe ships that you didn't like? Remember when you were also being educated and brought into this world of theory and you were applying it everywhere, and how you mellowed out eventually? It will happen to them. And younger people, the way you love something and feel passionate about it now, that will last with you. Do you want to get kicked out of spaces that you have nurtured and cared for and have given you safety because you get too old for them? Think about the environment that you want to be in and ask yourself, are you helping to create it? Or are you just trying to create your own castle with your own moat and drawbridge and having your own private conversations with other people? And anyone who tries to come to your drawbridge or ask your castle a question or is like, hey, I want to have a little debate about this. If everyone who does that is the enemy, then know that is also on you. I made this video because a naive part of me just feels like if you talk to somebody like a person, sometimes you can show them your perspective. And even if you don't agree with me, even if you don't agree with the things I said in this video with the certain ships or whatever, I respect that. I know there are going to be people who disagree with me when it comes to SessRin. I know there are people who disagree with me when it comes to the opinions that I feel on incest shipping. And that's okay. That's okay. What we shouldn't do is just don't harass me. Don't call me names. Don't project your opinion onto me. Don't do that. But debate what I feel about fiction. That's normal. We should be able to do that. And what's really a shame is that Fandom was one of my favorite places to do that. And every single day, that gets harder and harder and more painful to do. And it was already bad to be a Black person in this, and it's getting worse. And neither side is helping. Because neither side is actually concerned with making the spaces better for brown and Black people. They are concerned with being right. So it's like, do you want to be right? Or do you want to have a community that fosters and is safe for everyone?